Hello, Yu-Gi-Oh players, and welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJBZO. So yesterday, I went to my local Battle City event at Dice Age Games, and I brought my Chain Beat deck, which was actually a pretty good choice, even considering the fact that it is incomplete, still missing a few cards, including Widespread Dud, which is testing excellently, by the way, but that's a video for another time. The focus of my story is the match I had against a Blackwing player. Now, this player is very good. I know this as a fact. He's topped multiple regionals. I played against him at nationals, and I played against him a few times, so I know that this guy knows what he's doing, so I can't just chalk up my story to him being a bad player. Now, what happened was I won game one very easily. I opened with Ryo and Black Garden and 2 back row, and that is all I needed the entire game. He tried to Black Rose, I warninged, and I got 2 free tokens out of it. It was just a really terrible game for him. Game 2, however, he opens with a Bora and 3 set back row, and I open going Tenki into Rabbit. I set a Starlight Road, an MST, and a Compulsory. The Compulsory because I needed to have a play since I didn't open with a Black Garden. The MST because I wanted something to protect myself against Skill Drain, which I figure most Blackwing players side against decks like mine. And then the Starlight Road to protect myself against Ick Attack, which you will inevitably use when I attempt to compulsory his monster. What I got instead was an end phase Delta Crow. So right off the bat, I am -2, and then he goes Whirlwind, Zephyros into Blizzard, and I am -3. So right off the bat, I am in a terrible position. I draw absolutely nothing for most of the game, but I won. And the way I won is the subject of my video today. Today I'm going to talk about using mind games and psychological warfare in order to win when you are in a losing position. Now, one of the best pieces of Yu-Gi-Oh! Advice that I have ever heard is give your opponent every opportunity to make a mistake. Now, what that basically means is no matter how good your opponent is, if you give them an opportunity to make a mistake, there is a chance that they will make that mistake, however slim that chance is. And the more times you give them opportunities to make a mistake, the more often or the more likely it is that they will make that mistake. And that's exactly how that game played out for me. So I want to talk a little bit about psychological warfare in Yu-Gi-Oh! Which is an aspect of the game that I think is left ignored a lot of the time. So I will get down to it. So there are a few ways that psychological warfare works in Yu-Gi-Oh! To bring you out of a really tough situation. Now, the most important way to my duel yesterday is bluffing. Acting like you have a perfectly good hand, even if you are drawing dead. So this really works. These first two pieces of psychological warfare work the best in control decks, and I'll explain that in a second. But so if you explain, or if you act, I'm screwing up my words here. If you act like you have a perfectly good hand against any player, they will start playing accordingly. If if you look like you are really sullen, if you're drawing dead, your opponent will make big pushes against you, which is something you really don't want when you have a really bad hand. If you are playing like you have a really good hand, like you have your ideal play, which I'll get to in a second, then your opponent will play much more cautiously because they know that they need to be worried about the possibility that you go into the best play in your deck and absolutely wreck them. So it's in this way that I won this match yesterday. So I would, I'd have a rabbit on the board and I'd just start setting spell cards and useless trap cards, even though I knew that those cards would be useless. He didn't know that. And I acted like those cards were perfectly fine. Even though he had massive advantage over me, he wouldn't make any moves because he was scared of my back row. And he knew from the first game the kinds of things that my back row was capable of. So acting like I had perfectly good cards for my back row got me through until I actually got legitimate monster removal cards and a bear, which ended up carrying me to the end of the game. So psychological warfare works very well when you act confidently about really bad hands. And if you act like you have your ideal play in your hand, that's even better. Because, and I mean, this one qualification I have to add to this is that this only really works well for more controlsy decks, because in more aggro style decks, um, it tends to be the case that if you have your best play, you're going to make it. So you can't really act like you have your best play unless you do. But in a deck like Chainbeat, you can definitely act like you have your ideal play and trick your opponent into thinking that that's true. Um, so that's the first way that psychological warfare works to get you out of a really bad situation. Another way that psychological warfare works is making strange plays. If you make plays that your opponent doesn't expect to see, they're not going to they're not going to be in their right mind for countering those plays. I don't have a very good example off the top of my head right now. I was just taking a second to see if I could think of one. But a lot of the time, your opponent, especially if they know what deck you're playing, will think that they know all the plays to your deck. And if you prove them wrong, it will freak them out, and they will do things that would not make sense if they were really paying attention. They might warning a card that normally they wouldn't, but they don't know what you're doing, so they make the play out of desperation. They'll burn off monster effects that they shouldn't have in order to stop you. So if your opponent is confused about your plays, then they're unlikely to make smart decisions about it. And this is one of the advantages of playing a very rogue deck, and not playing the meta, but playing something new. You know what I'm talking about. I'm having real issues today because I have a pretty decently high fever right now. Anyway, so I was going someplace with this. Anyway, so playing weird plays that your opponent isn't expecting is one of the most powerful pieces of psychological warfare in the game. Another way that you can bluff your opponent into making just a terrible move is just really good eye contact. If you keep steady eye contact, if you don't change your demeanor throughout the game, they'll have no read on what you're doing. Unless they're a very good player, there are some cases where a player will be able to tell what you have based on the kinds of cards you're playing. They can predict what you have, but that's only if they really know the kind of deck you're playing well and are expecting all of your tech choices if you've made any. But really good eye contact without showing much emotion, that good poker face, but the eye contact is really important, confuses the hell out of opponents, and that's the kind of psychological warfare that makes people freak out in their brain, because we have this automatic feedback filter where if we're looking at a person, we want to find out what they're thinking from the emotion that they're showing us, but if we're getting no feedback from them at all, that's inherently stressful to the brain. This is actually a lot of psychology behind stage fright, and it works really well in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, particularly in a competitive setting. So those are a few ways that you can play mind games with your opponent, to use psychological warfare to try and get them to do really bad moves. There are other ways, including showing them certain cards and setting different cards with duality and things like that. But those are things for another video, and they're things that other people talk about pretty frequently, so I figured I wouldn't take up too much time to cover them. So I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. And then subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, discussion, analysis, and general Yu-Gi-Oh! Shenanigans. Meanwhile, thank you guys for watching Yu-Gi-Oh! Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJB0, and I got a jet. See you guys.